From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
$14.3 billion. That's how much Rhode Island lawmakers plan to spend over the next year under a budget bill that is making its way to Governor Dan McKee's desk. But with federal relief money drying up and demands for more spending on everything from health care to RIPTA, Assembly leaders are raising a long list of taxes and fees to make the math add up. Will the state budget ever get on a sustainable path, and which residents will soon be paying more? This week on Newsmakers, we'll break it all down with a reporters roundtable. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi, and we welcome back for this reporters roundtable Patrick Anderson from the Providence Journal and Nancy Lavin of Rhode Island Current. Welcome back to the show. It's good to have you both.
Great to be here.
Bleary-eyed, I'm sure. You've been covering all of
Not
this.
yet.
Yes, I know. Well, to your point, we are having this conversation on a Friday morning. Could be the last day of the Assembly, we'll see. But the budget passed the House. It's expected to pass the Senate. So that's where I want to start, is the $14.3 billion tax and spend plan. Around the table, Ted, we'll start with you. What was the most interesting or surprising thing about the budget this year?
I think for me it was the number of tax and fee increases. We knew money was getting tighter, but I thought that just meant they'd say no to more requests, and instead the Democratic leadership decided they just had to find money, look under the couch cushions. They're loath to touch the income tax, they're loath to touch the sales tax, but the gas tax, they always say no broad-based tax increases. That's a pretty broad-based tax, raising that 2 cents, right? And a $4 new monthly fee on everyone's health insurance plan. So
everybody with a car will feel it, right? Because either the gas tax or the electric vehicle tax.
Because there's a fee on that too. So just all the number of different ways in a fairly high tax state to begin with, they looked for new sources of revenue. It was more than I expected.
Patrick?
Yeah, and I think the question is sort of, are they done? Has this solved the problems, or are we going to be back? If there are cuts at the federal level, we'll probably be back. And they didn't do things that might be final and fix some of the structural problems. And a lot of the money did go to healthcare. And one thing we know about healthcare is that it's very important. It needs a lot of funding. It's a big need, but it's not something that's going to be fixed tonight. I don't think anyone would be surprised if we're not dealing with a healthcare crisis next year and providers still not having enough funding and wanting more. So there's a little feeling of like to be continued, and we might be back at some of these same things soon.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nancy?
One of the things that struck me, and isn't really about the final budget, but about everything that led up to it, is the amount of sort of miscalculations and big holes that the governor left in his initial proposal for lawmakers to kind of tidy up. He had these capital projects about closing minimum security at corrections and building a new hospital at Zambarano that his estimates in his initial budget were wildly off. There was a lot of money that he didn't account for, contracts with state troopers and correction officers, education aid to students in poverty, that just the mismatch between the number of students they thought and what it actually was pretty big this year. So I think to the point of taxes and fees, part of that is because lawmakers were kind of saddled with what seemed to me to be more than usual of a disparity to close.
Why wasn't there more opposition to the tax? Republicans didn't like it and they voiced their opposition, but there wasn't more debate, or it didn't seem like a lot of hand-wringing about the increased taxes and fees that there might have been. Does that just mean Speaker Shekarchi had a stranglehold?
Well, I think some of it is that once leadership has decided, and in an overwhelmingly one-party legislature, rank and file members cross the leadership or make noises that create bad headlines at their peril. I would assume that means lawmakers didn't hear a ton from their constituents in the week between the budget bill coming out and the final. If there had been a massive surge of letters,
now.
I think they will hear later.
And they might, but if they haven't heard yet, right? This is the thing. We sometimes will say on the show to people, if you're really upset about something, you really should email your legislators. They really care. They'll mention it to all of us. I got 7 emails from people about that. That's a lot sometimes. So if they didn't hear a lot, they might have felt like, well, people are swallowing this.
I think the gas tax might have been one where you would have gotten some kind of mass backlash or objection, and that didn't really catch catch fire. The other ones are more industry-based. When you look at a lot of the taxes around the real estate industry, that's if the industry itself doesn't have juice or something to really threaten lawmakers and leadership with, it's not going to get purchased on like a mass level. I mean, there aren't that many people with $1 million second homes. There might be a lot, but there's not that many. And things like the health insurance, the fees on that. Again, it's not as in your face as some other things that will get the mass public involved. So it's more if the industry was able to use its leverage, then you might have seen more pushback publicly.
I remember the days under Speaker Murphy and Speaker Fox. The budget debate would go to like 4 in the morning,
Yep.
right? And it just seems like...
I was there. Were you there the night it failed? You're too young, Nancy, but were you there the night it failed? That they had the unexpected, the leadership lost the amendment overnight in the House?
Right.
Different year.
It was
Speaker Fox, and the pension
Yes.
money got added and
Yes,
it blew
yes,
up the
yes.
budget. Yeah, and I remember all the reporters trudging to my car at 2
But
a.m.
why doesn't that happen anymore? What is it about that? What Speaker Shekarchi does where it's done quick?
The power centers in the Democratic Party in the state are on a get along footing right now. They are not looking for confrontation with each other, which wasn't the case 10 years ago. I mean, a lot of that is down to Speaker Shekarchi, who's much more collaborative than Speaker Fox, Speaker Murphy, and definitely Mattiello. And so you're not having those interchamber and governor versus Speaker or Senate President fights. That's the main reason. They're really looking to avoid those public battles where they're slinging mud and accusing each other of doing something wrong. And they are really under a strategy of, if we work everything out between us, we each give a little and compromise and then put a brave face on it. That will be the best thing to show to voters when we hit the doors at the election, no matter whether we're running for Senate rep or governor or whatever office it is. And until that breaks and you get a difference in the personality, a change in the personalities, I think it's going to continue to be like that.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. When we come back, we'll talk about the bill that has sucked all the oxygen out of the room up at the State House, and that is the assault weapons ban. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers and a reporter's roundtable from the Providence Journal. We have Patrick Anderson, and from Rhode Island Current, Nancy Lavin. I'm Tim White. This is Ted Nesi. Before we get to the assault weapons ban, which I teed up going into the break, I do want to talk about briefly Governor Dan McKee's cherished program, Learn 365. It got some money in the budget. Our colleague Kim Kalunian asked the governor about it on 12 News at 4. Here's what he had to say.
You've invested more than $80 million in these community learning centers across 18 different communities. How do these play a role in summer learning?
Yeah, so it's a big way that municipal leaders are going to be empowered to partnering with all their partners in their community. I was in East Greenwich last week at a groundbreak in Coventry yesterday with a big facility that's on the annex for the town hall. What's going to happen there, Kim, is that people are going to get engaged, parents are going to get engaged, and those learning centers are going to do 3 things. One is help with learning. The other one is help with earnings, so there'll be a lot of job fair issues and a lot of job training at these facilities. And then the third one is help. So those are 3 components of that, but our Learn 365 plan is growing, and I'm very pleased about that.
Governor Dan McKee on 12 News at 4 earlier this week. Nancy, initially though, the budget didn't have money for it, right? No.
Governor Dan McKee did not really make out well with his initiatives in the budget generally. Learn 365 was among the things taken out. However, on the floor on Tuesday, they added back in $1.3 million for that program because the AG just got another, I think, $30 million in a opioid settlement. So we had a little extra money that we didn't know we had a
What
week
did he
ago.
want? $2.5 million or something? Do you remember what was in his budget?
That sounds right, 2.5. That sounds
About that.
Okay. So it was the opioid settlement, but do you also think there was some let's do the governor a favor here?
Well, I mean, my eyebrow was raised when I saw they took it out because, as you said, this is, I mean, I think anyone, if we ask, what is the program he talks about the most, what does he care about, Learn 365? And to not put in the money for that when they were, as Nancy says, stripping a lot of his other proposals and plans out was like, for a governor who generally defers to the General Assembly a lot, give the guy something. And then they seem to have decided, and I'm sure there was pushback from his office, like, come on, guys.
The irony is not lost on me that the Attorney General's office actually helped save Governor McKee's Learn 365. All right, assault weapons ban. We want to remind everybody we are taping this on a Friday morning. By the time you watch this probably will have been decided whether it's going to pass, what form's going to pass or not. So we can't really touch on the final outcome, but I guess, Ted, walk us through how we got here, because this seems to be the bill that has garnered the most amount of attention and tension.
Yeah, it's totally fascinating. So for years, the assault weapons ban would die every year in the Senate, even if the House didn't even take a vote, because former Senate President Ruggiero opposed it. And the Senate Judiciary Committee had a makeup that opposed it. New Senate President Val Lawson, a supporter of the bill, comes in, and Ruggiero, before his death, had already been talking about bringing it up. So there's a lot of feeling this was moving this year. But as we know, a couple weeks back they were here on the show, Val Lawson teamed up with Frank Ciccone, an opponent of it, and he became the majority leader. So, the opponents of Val Lawson, led by Ryan Pearson, her opponent, have said she made a deal. She denied that on this show, but we were all wondering, how are they going to handle this hot potato? And so there was an interesting moment about a week ago now where Pam Lauria, Senator Lauria, on the floor tried to bring up or move, take a parliamentary maneuver, to get the House passed assault weapons ban there. And it very narrowly, Lawson was able to block that with help from Republicans. But that put, I think, even more pressure on her team to do something. So they popped up early this week with an assault weapons ban that still lets you have assault weapons. It doesn't ban possession. It only bans buying and selling them.
But that means you can go over the border and get the AR-15 and bring it back, presumably?
Yes. I mean, you'd have to go all the way to New Hampshire, I think, because I don't think you can get them in mass, right? But yeah, you can then bring it back down. And as you'd imagine, the number of the gun safety advocates and supporters of this are saying that's not a real ban. We don't want people to have assault weapons. We're not just saying you shouldn't be able to buy them, go get them somewhere else. But the AFL-CIO is now weighing in favor of the scaled back bill, I think partly because, they're worried about blowback to Lawson, who just got there and is their close ally. The House has still Friday morning, not said anything substantive about what's going to happen. So that's kind of whatever people have heard since. That was the state of play leading up to whatever is going to happen in the next 24 hours.
So, Patrick, let's talk about the real undercurrent that's happening here with the assault weapons ban, and that is, as always, with everything that's politics, but particularly, this is an odd number year. Next year is the even number year. It's an election year. So at play, are there concerns about primaries in the General Assembly, and then even bigger, who's running for statewide office? The bill's sponsor in the House, Rep. Jason Knight, could run for AG. House Speaker Joe Shekarchi, maybe he'll run for governor. Is that kind of what's simmering underneath all of this? That's
a big part of it. I think the polling suggests that the people running for statewide office, the Democrats, think that it plays very well in a Democratic primary, and that's why you're seeing the governor and a lot of people looking at, and the speaker and a lot of people looking at statewide office coming out and supporting it very forcefully. That's not necessarily the case on a district by district level in the General Assembly. And I think the real dynamic here is that in the Senate, Senate President Ruggiero for years recruited a number of very culturally conservative lawmakers to the Senate as a check on what was viewed as a progressive incursion to take over the Senate, which was getting sort of close. And he put them on Senate Judiciary as a block on all of the cultural bills. So you have a Senate now that is very economically liberal, but is culturally conservative and is this block on all kinds of progressive cultural legislation, including the assault weapons ban. So I don't know. The question is, how will a compromise assault weapons ban play in those statewide dynamics that we were talking about earlier, that all of the statewide Democrats think plays well? Does a sort of half measure, how does that leave voters, or will even register with them at all?
Just briefly, Tim, we should point out the bill that bans possession has majority support in the Senate. If there was a Senate roll call vote and all the sponsors voted, it would pass. It's only because it's stuck in judiciary. That's part of what's going on.
And leadership. But if it has support on the floor, if leadership says do not pass it, even those who support it on the floor will very likely not vote for it.
All right, we're going to take a break on the program. When we come back, final thoughts as the General Assembly wraps up. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers, a reporter's roundtable. I'm Tim White. This is 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi. We're joined by Patrick Anderson from the Providence Journal and Nancy Lavin from Rhode Island Current. Okay, so this is one of those weeks I'm grateful not to be a State House reporter. All due respect to the good journalists that surround me right now. Covering the budget, committee debates on controversial bills. We just spent a lot of time on a big one. Full floor votes. It just feels like there's probably a lot of running around up on Smith Hill in a lot of late nights. What's it like covering the State House in the final week of the Assembly? Nancy, will start with you.
Stressful, but kind of exciting too. I think as a longtime reporter and definitely political nerd, I've always been sort of the mentality that the most important things that journalists cover for the public are budgets and elections. And I think with elections, to some degree, the public has a better idea of kind of what's leading up to just the results. And I think that the public, unless they're also tuning into Capitol TV, and maybe even then, not entirely, don't totally know everything that's sort of being wheeled and dealed in the final weeks of session. That's going to affect them pretty significantly in terms of policies, in terms of dollars, in terms of transportation. So it's interesting to kind of get that close-up view of the thing that I feel like it's not really a secret, but no one else bothers to really spend their days.
And you have to make lightning quick editorial decisions in the moment about there's a lot happening, and what is the thing, distilling it, what is the most important thing our readers, our viewers need to know in that moment? That's a lot of responsibility as a journalist in the moment, and I'm sure your editors rely on your guidance as to where you're going to drive the train. Patrick, what's it like?
Yeah, you have to decide whether you want to try to follow a narrative that you think is going to get people interested and engaged versus actually trying to follow all of the dozens and dozens and dozens of things that will happen and will have some kind of effect on someone's lives, but isn't super compelling from a narrative perspective, that people are not going to read a whole, a lot of words about some obscure topic that they might end up paying for at some point, but it doesn't have that character or the personalities. So that's always the balance, is how much time do you spend watching so many different things happening at the same time. I think Ted used the red zone analogy, which is a good one I hadn't thought of. It's much more virtual now than it used to be in the old days, meaning because everything is streamed and everything actually happens on a computer. So you're watching multiple screens and devices to see bills getting added and voted on and changed.
So you're
all
not running from the
time.
Sub-basement to House Finance to
sometimes, but it used to be more of that. It used to be literally, you walk back and forth around the rotunda and then down the stairs.
And
you get your steps in.
I can give a little hat tip to the Assembly on in my 15 years at Channel 12, we have made some strides in transparency. We couldn't get committee votes online for a long time. Committee documents are now online. Capitol TV, they do a nice job over there taking really a billion different Senate committee hearings. But the problem is we still are only one person each, right? And so I looked last night, actually, I was totaling it up, and I think the Senate calendars as of last night had almost 200 bills posted for votes today. And, we're not writing up every single one. Some are dry, pretty technical things. But there's most of them have some story behind them. And so you're trying to figure out which one matters. And by the way, it's not, I think you two would agree, it's not necessarily the one that gets the big debate. It's the one that passes with no comment that turns out to open up a loophole or something that we're covering in 6 months that you worry about. I personally always worry, are we, the press corps writ large, missing something that they're kind of sneaking through on us because it's obscurely worded, but it's going to have a big effect. There's a lot of
so you end up you're paying this huge amount of attention to something completely obscure that no one cares about because you're worried that there's some deal that you don't even know what the deal is behind the scenes that you're missing, and it can drive you insane.
Yes. and then I will say this
now
too.
You know why reporters are stressed out all the time.
The rank and file lawmakers are also texting the reporters because we sometimes know better than them what's coming up on the the floor.
I would say too, even the lawmakers, like it is. I mean, when I first was a reporter, it was really shocking, and now it doesn't faze me. Maybe that's just that I'm jaded. That even bill sponsors sometimes, if you call them up to ask them what their bill is about, oh, you know, I'm not up to speed on that.
Call the lobbyist.
Yeah, exactly. And with something like the assault weapons ban, as Tim said, you know, sucking up so much attention and time and behind the scenes discussions, this would be a great year to sneak in something else that no one has any time to research or figure out what it means.
It's also where, like, I'm grateful. Television has been good to me, but I did start out in newspapers, and these guys working in print/digital mediums where you can write a lot of words. I mean, there's so much going on. Some of it's arcane. You need space. You need a lot of words, and it only really, I think, text-based news is able to get through as much. You know, you have a 6-month session, but there is 6 months of news in this 1 week when they're finishing up. And so you rely on the reporters who are trying to watch all of it and write it. These two, their colleagues, the folks at the Globe, they're doing a lot of that stuff. I think it's really where I think we don't want to go to an only Instagram Reels-based news system. I think we will regret that over time if we end up there.
All right, there's always one bill to me that kind of surprises me anyway every year that kind of pops up. And Nancy, briefly, about a minute or so left. One of those bills is the banning smoking at the casinos. And you know, with the passing of Senate President Ruggiero, looked like, okay, this is going to happen. But all of a sudden, there's drama on this bill.
I mean, there always is. So as Ed Fitzpatrick at the Globe reported, is how I found out, the Senate passed a version of it on Wednesday, but with some floor amendments that are pretty significant in how they could be interpreted to allow sort of broad exemptions to the smoking ban within Rhode Island's 2 casinos. The House sponsor, Teresa Tanzi, said in the Globe, told Ed, I'm not into that. You know, I want the ban as we've proposed it. So the House is slated to vote on its version today, but at some point, much like the assault weapons ban, the 2 sides are going to have to agree on something or we'll get nothing.
Yeah, probably a lot of horse trading going on.
Oh, yes.
Ted, Patrick brought up something in the first half of the show that stuck out to me, you know, talking about the budget. So I want to wrap it up here. You know, budget's pretty much done. Governor will sign it and then it's all over. But is it really? Because looming over all of this is the federal spending bill. Could they need to come back?
They could. Speaker Shekarchi has floated that. That's part of how he put off the millionaires tax people, saying like, well, if we need that money in October, maybe I'll come back and we'll do a millionaires tax, even though I don't think he really wants to do that.
Right.
I admit, I assume that in the end, whatever comes out of Congress is going to have some delay in when the actual effects on the Rhode Island state budget would be, even if it's as soon as next year. So I have a little trouble, because if there was that much disruption in Rhode Island, you'd assume that was happening in 49 states. You don't want every state's budget in chaos after a few months. But I think it's going to be a big discussion in the coming years.
I agree. Well, look, coverage of the State House is in good hands. Patrick Anderson. Check out the Providence Journal, Nancy Lavin. You can check out Rhode Island Current, of course, Ted Nesi here at WPRI.com. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.